So just to recap from the last video, we have our 4 variables that are representing whether or not a key is being pressed. We use these function events on event handlers to test when keys are pressed down from those 4, setting the key variables to true. And when fingers are picked up or no longer pressing a button, we set the respective variable back to false. When we press the start button is when everything is going to start to happen. So we showed the cat image and how it hid the start button, and we started our time loop. We said 20 milliseconds is good for things to kind of look like they're moving well. In the time loop, I'm setting the velocity back to 0 each time. And that's because the next thing we're going to do in the time loop is check to see whether or not the buttons are pressed and use that. We also, each time in the time loop, want to get the X position and Y position of the cat so that we can use those values to start movement. So what we need to do, we need to say if key left. So key left means that key left is true. So if this variable is true, which will happen when we're pressing the left button, and it doesn't really matter what order I'm going in. I chose to do left first. I did left first here. Maybe I wanted to do left first here. I could fix that, but the order doesn't necessarily matter. So if key left is true, the X velocity, if I'm pressing left, is going to equal -5 because we're going to be moving back. And then I can continue to copy this, making sure I'm in the right direction. So I'm going to copy this and just create some else ifs. So else if key right. We want to move in the positive X direction. Copy this so I can get the else if. Else if key up. This part's a little tricky. When we're pressing up, we might think of positive Y's on a graph, but remember, as we move up on the screen, we can even see it here. The Y values are getting smaller. So we want the Y velocity to be -5. And then lastly, if we have key down, we want the Y velocity to be +5. So just while you're typing, the first 2 should be X, -positive. The second 2 should be Y, -positive. Now, I wouldn't want to use an else here because we could also have the situation where nothing is being pressed. And in that case, we don't want any sort of velocity, so you do need an else if on that last statement. So once I have the velocity set, really movement is just position plus velocity, position plus velocity, and we'll continue to do that over the time every 20 milliseconds. So now I'm going to set the position of the cat image, and the parameters we need now are the X and the Y. So I'm going to take the current position the cat is in, its current get position, and I'm going to add it to its X velocity. So if it's 0, it'll stay in the same place, right? But if it's positive or -5, it'll move. Negative will move left, positive will move right. The same thing for the Y. We're going to take the current Y position of the cat and add it to its Y velocity, and that should create some movement. So I know this was a lot at the same time. You'll see each time through the time loop, I'm going back to 0 because I don't know if the button, if key left is still true or key right is still true or anything like that. So let's just run it and see how it works. Now, when you use the key presses, you do have to click on the screen once for it to register. And then you'll see if I press my right button, it moves right. If I press my left button, it moves left. If I hold it down, it will continually work too because that's key down is still true. So the only thing I see is usually with a game, we don't want to move something off the screen. So that's the last little thing we want to work on. All that involves to make it not go off the screen is adding something to my if statements. So basically, I want to keep moving left until xcat equals 0. So xcat is greater than 0. So if it's less than 0, I don't want to keep moving to the left, okay? And we're going to play around with that number, but I'm just going to start with 0 here. In the same way, and actually, you know what, let's just test that. So I'm going to press my left button and it stops right there. So it can't move any further. Now, I really do want it to look like it's bouncing off the side or hitting the side of the screen. So the best number I found here, if I do negative 15, it's going to move over just a little bit more. The reason is there's like a white border on this image, so it doesn't touch all the way to the side. So I clicked, and now it's not perfect. It's moving in multiples of 5. So I really have to use a multiple of 5 anyway here to have it work. I could, do some other things to make it a little more precise, but that's good enough for now. So repeating that, I'm just going to copy this line of code or this piece of this line of code, and we'll make adjustments we're going to need in each direction. We want to stop it from moving off the screen. So now when I move in the right direction, I want it to stay less than the side of the screen is 320, but I found that 235 worked well because really we're measuring from the very left corner. So now if I run it, it looks like it stops there. It looks like it has some limits as to how far it can move, but if I move up and down, I haven't set that yet. I actually have the up and down set based on the X, which doesn't make sense. So I'm going to make this Y cat. And I found here negative 20 worked best. The border was just a little different size. And Y cat, this number needs to be bigger because the Y values on the screen go larger. So I found that 375 was helpful. So I think when we play games, we think that things are actually running into sides, but it's really just geometry, okay, and limits and if statements behind what makes things not be able to go off screens in video games.